we need a connection. And I think one of our universal truths is we all are seeking connection. And the beauty of a strong presentation is it connects you, and it creates that ideal space so that you can have a conversation. And when you have a conversation, it doesn't feel salesy.
Emily Schneider is a visual storyteller with an enthusiastic passion for presentation design. And I think that failing to give a good presentation is an incredible missed opportunity. Well, you're in luck, because today Emily is going to show us how we can leverage good presentation design to deliver a great talk. She has a huge passion for delivering good and visual storytelling. She also uses PowerPoint, and I asked her point blank about that. So I'm really excited for you to hear that answer. Now, I want you to look for these top takeaways. One is to start with the audience in mind. You need to know where you want to take your audience so that you can deliver a good presentation. I always say this: you don't know how to start if you don't know where you want to end. You should also craft a compelling story. Speaking of, begin with the end in mind so that you can structure your presentation around a clear storytelling arc. And when it comes to the actual slides, balance images and words. You want it to be simple and stylized. You don't want it to look busy or have too much text, because that's going to be distracting. And Emily is a pro at this. She's going to give us lots of great advice. Now, if you want to hear a longer ad-free version of this episode where I take Emily's advice and roast one of my own recent talks slides, you can become a member at streamlined.fm/join. You'll also get access to every episode ad-free, extended, and early. But that's it for the intro. You'll be able to find all of the links and the show notes over at streamlined.fm/431. But for now, let's get to the intro and then the interview. Welcome to the Streamlined Solopreneur, a show for busy solopreneurs to help you improve your systems and processes so you can build a business while spending your time the way you want. I know you're busy, so let's get started. All right, I'm here with Emily Schneider, visual storyteller. Emily, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Joe. It's so nice to be here.
I'm really excited to talk to you, and so I just want to dive right into it. I think as a programmer in a former life, I've always optimized efficiency, and so I want to talk to you about kind of like delivering just the message versus a story like with the message. How important is story in delivering the message?
I mean, I believe that the story is the message, or it should be combined. One of my favorite ways to kind of analyze, I guess not analyze, but to like explain the importance of it is I have young kids, but we all learned to read at some point in our life. But before we could read, we read books. And that's what my 5-year-old does. She doesn't know how to read, but she loves reading books because there's so much power in a visual that can create an emotion, that can create a connection, and that could help you understand and see a story come to life. And then in the end, know what happened, know what the reasons were, or right. And so I think there's so much power in pictures. There's also this amazing stat that our brains are 65% more likely to retain information and to digest it when it's visually designed than when it's just copy. So to me, those 2 points are the reason why storytelling is the message. It should be part of the message. You shouldn't just be sharing a story just black and white. Don't get me wrong. I love reading. I love having, old school books in my hand. I'm not a digital reader, but when you're trying to, especially within business, right? When you're trying to connect with your audience, when you're trying to make a sale, when you're trying to give a product update or an investor pitch or any kind of communication, having slides with a story connected to your presentation as a voice just enables you to get to your point and really make an impact, and get your audience to do or to act or to feel exactly how you want them to do. So if you can drive that conversation, it becomes a win for everybody.
Yeah, I think that's really smart, right? And I finally have an answer. When I was in high school, my dad would always ask me, how I could remember every movie quote and not remember like my math homework. And it's clearly because movies are visual and math is just numbers on a page, right?
Yep.
So I finally have an answer to that now 20-year-old question. Um, and I want to key in on the other thing you said here about kind of like the story being the message, right? Apple, when it sells the Apple Watch, doesn't tell you, oh, it has an ECG monitor, right? It tells you, they tell you how many lives the Apple Watch has saved, right? And that's more impactful than like just some random feature on the watch, right? That story is the thing that's going to get people like me to go out and buy their elderly parents an Apple Watch, right?
Hmm.
Because it gives me peace of mind. So I think that's really important. And it kind of answers our question, right? Like, why can't I just deliver a list of facts, right? Like, this was my follow up question. I think you've done a good job of answering that, though, unless you want to tack on anything here.
I mean, I believe that the power of a really strong presentation is allows you to have a conversation with who you're talking with, right? You're not talking at them, you're talking with them. Just like when you think about marketing or advertising campaigns, to your point, when they talk about the data facts, they are marketing to you and they don't know if you're listening or where you're at or how you're doing it, right? So it's kind of like a conversation of like one to many and nobody's really listening. But when you can engage somebody and create that more personal connection, that trust, you create that credibility by, again, creating a conversation and a space. You just drive your impact and drive your reason for being there even more. So yeah, I don't, I obviously where I focus and my expertise is bringing those stories to life. So I think that there's just so much power and knowing that like even just data, right? You can't just like throw out numbers on a spreadsheet when you can see it in a chart. Simply, there's so much more power to see where we're going, to see how growth is happening, to see where changes and where challenges are and how you can meet them. So there's so much power in a visual, and it doesn't have to be overdone. Simple is always best. Less is more. But there's so much power in that. So yes, it should not just be words, but words will help support your visuals. I think, I guess the creme de la creme is like a presentation that has no pictures in it, but those are, again, very specific use cases because you have to be in a space, in the right room, in the right environment to really tell that story properly.
Yeah, absolutely. And the things I'm thinking about here, right, is if we focus strictly on story for a minute, right? There's a reason why every business book, every good business book at least has a story at the beginning of each chapter, right? Like, oh, I was working with XYZ client and their problem was blah, and then we explored this. And then they get into the meat of it, and at the end they say, by the way, because XYZ client did this, like their sales increased or whatever, right? Like there's you put the narrative and it becomes concrete, much like I can tell you, right, that, month over month, my downloads have increased 20%.
Mhm.
But until you see like July 2023 versus July 2024, uh, you're not going to see just how much growth that is, or you're going to have a harder time visualizing it.
Exactly. I just finished this book called The Go Giver. Have you heard of this series by John Berg?
No,
Oh, it's amazing.
no.
So he calls them the five stratospheric laws of being a go-giver. But it really is about how you add value, how you elevate, and it's not about just the thing. It's about the message. It's about the story. It's about the connection. It's about doing. You still are receiving, but when you can give, when you can share, when you can talk with somebody, when you can make a referral, when it's out of your wheelhouse or something, those simple things really help again elevate your story and who you are, and that payback is so good. So when you talk about the idea that like every business book has a story, right? We need a connection, and I think one of our universal truths is we all are seeking connection, and the beauty of a strong presentation is it connects you, and it creates that ideal space so that you can have a conversation. And when you have a conversation, it doesn't feel salesy. It doesn't feel like this. It doesn't feel like that. It just feels like we're all in for the same purpose. We all come with our point of view. We all can add value, and we build it together. And I think that's what makes that's where the magic is working together to build something better.
Yeah. Oh man, that's such I love that. Okay, so let's before we get into like the real like nuts and bolts of the
Yeah.
matter, right? I think we've danced around this definition a little bit. But can you put like a very clear definition on what is visual storytelling?
Yeah. So visual storytelling is the power of adding visuals to help emphasize, focus, and really deliver your message in a simplified way. I say I have a magical knack for simplifying complex information to help people better connect with their end user or their audience. Um, so that I think that is it. If that's still a little fluffy, I can go into the very specifics of what that looks like. I use a 4-part process. I focus specifically, obviously, on the visual storytelling, but any kind of presentation prep work, I believe you need to think about your audience, where it's being delivered, and also what your story is, right? So that's getting in the nuts and bolts. Are we ready to go there?
Just about. I want to
Okay.
drive this point home though, right?
Yeah.
Because like the main difference between, some of my most impactful presentations have been around me telling a story about how I had a panic attack. I won't recount that because I'm sure listeners have heard it a million times. And then me sharing a picture of my 3 small children, right? Because they're the reason I've optimized and streamlined my business. And that's always been really impactful, right? Because now people are not just kind of like substituting in like just small generic children. They actually see my kids and they associate what drives me, and it helps them understand that I want to help them too. So I think that's really important. And I want to get into the nuts and bolts, but like, can I just have plain text on my slides? I mean, I think we know that we shouldn't just have like a wall of text, right? We shouldn't be reading off of our slides. That's very boring. But like, can I just have like one word or a couple of words? Is that bad?
No, it's not that. I was going to say yes and, right? Yes and you can have simple
nice.
words.
All right.
But where I like to preach and what I like to share about is I kind of mentioned before simplicity. I go consistency and and intentionality. So when you can approach that, take those 3 nuggets and think about that from all the slides as a total story to individually. Yes, for sure. You can have one word. You can have a short sentence. Is it laid out nicely? Is it in the middle of the page? Is your font choice, elegant enough where it's not overpowering, where it's digestible? Sometimes it's all caps. Sometimes it's in sentence case. Sometimes it's in lowercase. Do you bold a word? Oh, one of the words, so when you can be intentional and it has purpose, anything is possible. And that's the beauty of adding and elevating with visual storytelling to your presentation. It's being intentional with how you set up your story and your slides so that they really drive home the key takeaways per slide. You want to be, to your point, you don't death by PowerPoint, I think is like the phrase that like I've heard thrown around a bunch. But yeah, I mean, like you can have bullets on a page. Are they stylized in a nice way? Are they all treated the same?
Mm-hmm.
Are you limiting them? Or are they paragraphs long? Nobody's going to remember that. But if they're, short sentences, one of my favorite tips and simple things is using color. When you talk about a topic or or let's say, or a quarter or something that's similar, and you're repeating that along, use a color to represent it. Use an icon, because when our brains, again, when you can add a little bit of something to so our brains can see the story, it automatically not only re-engages us as audience members, but it gives us cues that like, oh, we've talked about this before. Oh, I can remember this. And also to your point of like remembering the quotes from a movie line, there's something there that is memorable. And so it's easy to hold on to and it's easy to bring along.
Yeah, that's great. I read, or maybe one of my public speaking teachers in college, said, somebody shouldn't be able to get the whole presentation by just looking at your slides, right? It's really a combination of you delivering the talk and using the slides for exactly what you're saying, right? Like driving home a point, making something stick a little bit better. And what you want is people pulling out their phone and taking a picture of that one slide that really resonates with them, right?
Mm-hmm. And it also just drives the conversations at the end about what you want it to be, right? Because you're keeping your audience engaged. To your point, when you have too much on a slide, when you have everything there, they're going to read it. And now they're tuned out. And we know that we multitask already all the time. We're always creating stories. I mean, I can hear a sound and it brings back a memory. And all of a sudden I'm like, a few minutes later, like, whoa, what was I doing? Because that's just how we are. That's just how we operate. We're always on information overload, and our brains naturally will intake information and will create these other things or try to connect it. And so as a presenter, when you can have slides that I always think of them as like the background to support what you're saying, you're just enhancing your connection, your communication. Then if somebody does hear something and they go on a little tangent or they think about another project, oh, this is a good idea, they can come back to your slide when you're talking. They could hear a keyword and they're back in tune. They're tuned in, right? I get where you're talking about. Oh, you're talking about that again. We see this color, or we see this picture, or we see this icon. And so that's also the power of less on a slide, because then you can also change up the slides. So you're also then visually engaging your audience. So I think there's so many magical parts of it. Obviously you can tell I geek out about it. I might be going on too many tangents, but the idea of when you can be intentional, you can be simple, and you can be consistent, you can lead and direct your audience exactly where you want them to go and how you want them to focus. So even if they get lost or they go down, they get disengaged, it's so easy to bring them back and keep that conversation going and create, again, a conversation. You're not just talking at them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think about because we don't want it to be too distracting, like you said, right? And I think about in Game of Thrones season 8, right, when they left the Starbucks cup in the shot. I don't know if you remember this.
Yep.
I have no idea. I cannot tell you what that scene was about anymore. All I can see in my head is Daenerys with a Starbucks cup next to her, right? And I'm sure it was a really impactful and important scene coming up towards the end of the series, but I'm too distracted. That's the only thing I remember from the episode. Mm-hmm. And I'm confident I'm not alone on this. And so before I get to kind of why PowerPoint, which is one question I want to ask you, we're on the avoid making slides too distracting. I think you've touched on this a lot, but maybe we can talk about a little bit the relationship between text and when to use a graphic. I'm big on using. I talk about Star Wars a lot in my presentations, and I'm big on using a screenshot from the movie. When are things like that too distracting? What kind of balance should we find there?
I think that they need to be intentionally laid together. They should have power together, because an image with words can help set that up. An image by itself can do so much too. But images don't just have to be pictures. They can be graphs. They can be shapes. They can be something that is not just copy. Color, gradients, or something I'm seeing all the time. Again, it creates and it engages somebody. And so I think that there is so much power in that balance, and they need to be balanced in order to really tell a story. Yes, you can have some slides that are just pictures and some slides that are just words. Again, we talked about that, but the idea that they work together is really the hero. And I don't know if there's a wrong way. There's a wrong way if it's overdone, if there's too many words, if you have too many pictures. Mm-hmm. But again, when you can be consistent and simple, so your styling of your photography or your styling of your charts is all the same. You can, I do charts a lot for investment decks where they're showing data and growth and potential. And we'll have 4 or 5 different types of charts on a slide. But when they're treated similarly, when we're talking about, usually that's in quarters, right? So if the quarter 1 is always in the same color and quarter 2 and quarter 3, it makes it easy to look at all of them, and it doesn't look overwhelming. When you start to really create some chaos on there, again, I think if you look at it and you're confused, it's going to be confusing for somebody else. So they definitely can work together. I think there's power in them. I'm always an avid adding imagery, but I do think that to be honest, a lot of the work I work on, and with some more business intelligence, financial, banking, pharma companies, there's not so much imagery as it is telling a story without pictures, but we're using pictures. We're creating pictures. We're emphasizing data and numbers because that's our picture. And so there's so many little things that can really make a big difference. Again, if you take a few minutes to prep, I think it all comes down to planning and being thoughtful. To your point, you remember the stuff that really makes an impact, and the stuff that's that's not thought about, that's not planned about. Those are the presentations or the conversations we don't remember.
Yeah, I like that a lot, and I think based on the answer you just gave here, I probably already know the answer to this question, but you specifically call out PowerPoint, both in I think we matched on Podmatch, so shout out to Podmatch, yeah, and your website. Is there a reason that you've chosen PowerPoint over others like Keynote or Canva?
Yeah. So I find that PowerPoint one is like one of the most universal used tools across all businesses, right? It's accessible and it's editable by all people. That's part of what I love. I came from the marketing and agency world. I was a creative director and I worked in the Adobe suite, and I loved working in those. There's so much power, but there was always the challenge of I would do something, and if a client had a small change, I had to go back and get and have it. And I think when you can own something and we can collaborate and we can build it together and everybody has equal parts, it makes a lot of sense. PowerPoint also is a tool for presentations. It's not a design tool. It's a tool to help tell your story. And that's exactly what I come in to do. And personally, it's kind of like you have this, give me a really great box to work in and let me see how I can push the boundary. And that's what I love about it, is that it gives, there's restrictions and there's boundaries, but it allows me to raise the bar because I know where those edges are. And sometimes you go too far and you can bring them back in. PowerPoint's just been around a lot longer. I think Canva has some beautiful spaces, but Canva doesn't give the perfection, or I don't think it's as it looks beautiful, but when you get down to it and the usability and the ability to transfer it around, it kind of can get funkier. I know it has some great features. I have had clients who are who are working in there and sharing documents and downloading them as PowerPoints and stuff. But again, it gets a little funky. I'm all about less is more, and PowerPoint is like, it's what started it all. And everybody again has access to it. So it's where I become the master of my craft.
That's great. Yeah, I find I've been using Canva a lot, but it's mostly because I'm sharing decks online, and Canva is like an online based thing. I find the biggest thing that Canva is lacking is the concept of like a slide master, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's I forget now if I'm mixing up the Keynote terminology with the PowerPoint terminology.
No, but
slide
PowerPoint uses them too. Totally.
Yeah, slide master is that, right? I taught Microsoft Office at the University of Scranton in like an intro to college course for a long time, but it's been a long time, and so I'm like, am I mixing up the terms?
That's so funny.
Yeah, like I want to be able to change like the slide master and have all of my slides change, and Canva is just lacking that, and so I do. It does take me extra time to be like, are these fonts consistent? Is this the right size? Is everything aligned properly? Because if I move from one similar slide to another and like the text shifts just a little bit, I'm like, that's super distracting to me.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
It shouldn't be a problem I have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, and again, Canvas is a great tool for somebody who is a little bit just getting started, a novice, right? Somebody who's not as experienced. And PowerPoint, again, to your point, it allows you to set up masters. It allows you to have some kind of checks and balance system that really does help. And yeah, it's those little things, to your point, that when they jump, they make a big difference. And I do not design in Canva for that purpose. I do it, sometimes I'll mess around with it for more more personal stuff. But yeah, I've heard it's that kind of stuff where like it can look beautiful, but doesn't function at the professional level that you desire. It might take more work.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so as we wrap up here, I want to get into the actionable advice side of things, right? People who are listening are like, man, I haven't put that much thought into my slides. And I should say, like, we've talked in the context of presentations. This could be like in-person presentations, right? It could be virtual events. I also advise a lot of my clients and students on like, you should have if you want sponsors, you should have a pitch deck, right? And so like anytime you're visually trying to tell a story, what we're talking about here can apply, right?
Totally.
It's not just like keynote
I've
speeches or whatever.
designed presentations that have been emailed. It could be a single slide. It's
Yeah.
anything that helps you tell your story to connect with somebody so that they can not understand a little bit more about how, like what your process is, what your challenges are, and what you need them to do. That's a story, right? Um,
Awesome. Okay, cool. I love that. So let's start here. You have on your blog, you share your 4 simple tips for impactful PowerPoints. Can you give a quick review of those or an
Yep.
overview of those?
Totally. And I would love, again, I think this is a great resource for people to use. I call it a one pager, so you could print it, put it up, or reference it as you're building your next story. It starts with audience, understanding who you're talking to, but more so what you want them to think, feel, and do, right? When you understand who they are, you can really craft how or what style your presentation is going to be. I use a visual chart of a triangle pending how much information, how much detail you need to, I think is important in understanding who your audience is. The second tip I always craft is about the storytelling. Writing your story. I do not write stories. I help refine stories. But when you are writing your story, and especially from a presentation, from a sales, from telling somebody something and you want them to make a decision at the end, you want to start with the end in mind. I think that's the biggest difference than a traditional story, is you want to give them where you're going or what your desired responses at the end, so that they understand why they're there, and you can kind of engage with them and make sure everybody's on the same page. And then you go through the beginning, the middle, and the end, setting the stage, right? Then the middle is really talking about the challenge, the need. If you're talking about getting somebody to sponsor you, right? What I'm looking for, what the benefits are. And then the end is wrapping that up. It's reinforcing why they're there, what you need them to do, and answering any questions. And hopefully by then, because you've brought them along and you've engaged them from the beginning, they're ready to make those decisions or ask those informed questions. And then this is where the magical part comes in, I believe. It's in the visual design. So when you think about your design, after you have your story, and I always tell my clients, put it out in slides. It could be, again, just words on a slide, but start to think about not just from a totality of your story, but individual, your slide intention, your text, or the content on each slide, and then the visuals. So you want to emphasize 2 to 3 details per slide. If you need to have more slides, so you have less on a slide, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I know that some people will be like, you only need so many slides, but too much information does nobody any good. So break it up, make it easier, change it up a little, and keep people engaged. When you think about content, we kind of mentioned that. Headlines should be written very, precise. Think of them like a newspaper headline. They keep them short. They're really big, right? They want to be catchy. Same with bullets. You don't want long bullets. You want people to remember the key takeaways. And that could also be in how you stylize your type. Bolding, italics, color, all of that will resonate. And it comes with being consistent across the board too. So if you have a style of bullets, use that style on every page. Don't start mixing things up. It allows people to really kind of resonate and understand or know, okay, that's secondary information. This is the primary information. That hierarchy is more established. And then it's the visuals, or it's the graphics. So again, it could be icons, it could be pictures, it could be charts, it could be data, it could be infographics, whatever that is. And that style that matches what your brand feel is, use it, leverage it. Less is more. You don't need all the data. Sometimes you just need to say where you started or where you end. You don't need 30 pictures. Sometimes 3 does it. They don't need to fill the page, those kind of things. So again, less is more, simplicity and consistency. Oh, and then delivery. I forgot the 4th part, delivery, which once you, now that you have your deck, you got to deliver it. So once you have worked through all that, once you really have honed in on your audience and understand what they need to know, feel, and do, right? You have your story written with the end in mind at the beginning, and you have your slides designed. Your delivery is kind of like a no-brainer. You're going to have more confidence. You're going to have greater connection. You're going to have more impact. You're going to say a lot less words because you've taken the time to prep it, and you're going to be able to really connect with your audience and get them to do exactly what you want. Isn't that what a presentation is all about? Sharing information and having somebody believe it and agree with you at the end.
Yeah, this is great. There's nothing worse than a long rambling talk, right? I was at a conference. I won't name the conference. I won't name the person, but this person basically started their presentation by saying, I'm not as prepared as I should be. I didn't think anybody would come to my talk. And then they just proceeded to read notes off of their phone. And I'm like, you could be telling me the secret to making $10 million and I'm just like not engaged. Like you cut against your authority. You're rambling and you're reading from your phone. Like I can't tell you a single thing from that talk.
Totally.
So
Yeah.
I think, and then conversely, like I saw, Luke Robluski, I saw him speak 14 years ago at a web design conference, and his slides matched the story. The pacing was amazing. And a lot of what he said in that talk, like made it into one of my books on web design, responsive web design. So like that stuff really stuck with me. Like I can see some of his slides, like again, 14 years on.
Right.
So big, like there's a big difference.
Yeah. So much power. I do ramble about this work though. Ironically, you just said like we've been to presentations where they just ramble, and I feel like I just rambled up. But there's some really great tips on that one pager to help.
Yes, and that will be in the show notes along with everything we talked about over at streamlined.fm/431. So we'll get some more links on how you can find Emily in a minute. I do want to ask you one more question though, and that's what's the biggest mistake that you see from people doing presentations that our audience can avoid, right? It's let's assume that the people listening know how to do a presentation or like make a presentation, make slides. What's one of the biggest mistakes that you see people make?
I think it comes down to not focusing on being simple and being consistent. When you can be simple and you can be consistent throughout your presentation, you're going to have a winning conversation for sure.
Awesome. I love that. It's almost like when you make a dinner and you try to use all the spices on the spice rack because you think more flavor is going to make it taste better. It's actually going to make it taste worse, right? Because like those flavors don't go together and things taste weird and one overpowers the other. Where like just like a little bit of seasoning might have done the job.
I love that analogy. Perfect. Exactly. That's it.
Oh, awesome. Well, Emily, this has been a blast, a real like whirlwind and masterclass in visual storytelling in a short amount of time. If people want to learn more about you, where can they find you?
Yes, you can find me on my website. I am emilyschneider.com. I'm also very active on LinkedIn as well.
Fantastic. And like I said, those links and everything we talked about will be in the show notes over at streamlined.fm/431. There's no pro show interview with Emily and I today. And we'll talk about kind of the compressed timeline, and maybe I'll even roast one of my own presentations based on what we learned in the main show. So you could become a member over at streamlined.fm/join for ad-free extended versions of every episode. Emily, thanks so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Joe. It's such a pleasure. Thanks for letting me ramble on about the things I love to do. I hope I can help.
Absolutely. It was excellent. Thank you so much. Thanks to our sponsors, and thank you for listening. And until next time, I'll see you out there.